Welcome back to Neuroconversion Leadership, where we talk about effective leadership and communication. In the past, I always said in the STEM workplace, but it's really more than that. It's wherever neurodivergence occurs, which is just about everywhere. In fact, on your team, you almost certainly have someone who's neurodivergent. You may or may not know it. Yesterday, I was at an inclusion conference and I got to do a fireside chat with Ariana DeAngelis. She works at the Autism Project and coaches and does talks on how to work with people who have autism. As you know, my scope is a little bit broader, and I talk about more of the corporate workplace and how neurodiversity can help be productive in the work, and you just have to be open to it. So that's what I'm going to have as this week's podcast. It's going to be a recording of the fireside chat that we had. The first 28 or so minutes are the two of us talking, and then there's a little bit less than 10 minutes of questions from the audience. I hope you enjoy it because it was a lot of fun for me. I'm Jeremy. This is Ariana. We're going to talk about inclusion in the workplace, specifically focused around cognitive diversity and neurodiversity. So if we can start, Ariana, if you can tell everybody what it is that you do and how you started doing that.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name's Ariana DeAngelis. I'm the training manager for the Autism Project. And I started out as a classroom teacher. I started working with students 18 to 22 years old in a transition program, both here and overseas. I worked as a teacher in Italy as well. And in the time, about 10 years that I was in the classroom, I kept feeling like I wasn't doing right by my students. Something was missing. Something about how I was being asked to teach just didn't feel aligned with how I understood autism and how I connected with my students. So I left teaching. I let my license expire, so I couldn't go back. I forced myself out.
Burn the bridge.
Yes, exactly. And I ended up at the Autism Project and started training teachers. And I thought, I'm going to equip the teachers with the things I wish I had. But then I became a manager of autistic people. And suddenly I had that same old feeling again. I'm not doing right by the people that it's my job to support. So I oriented myself towards the idea of how do we support and create a neuro-inclusive workplace. And that's sort of the kind of, I'm sure you've seen this a lot, Jeremy, like the throwaway, during the month of April or one lunch and learn, we're going to talk about this topic, but how do we create this from the bottom to the top? How do we change our culture? How do we change our values so that every neurotype is supported? So that's why I'm here. Jeremy, I'd love to hear about you and your experience.
Great. And just to let everyone know, we're basically going to talk to each other for about 40 minutes. And you're going to watch. And then after that, you can ask many questions as you want. If something's burning, go ahead and ask it. So I'm Jeremy, and when I was growing up, math and science always made sense. Humans never made sense to me. It was as if everybody got a code book and I never got it, and I couldn't figure out what was going on. It felt like they were being difficult on purpose. And I was lucky enough when I was in high school to work at an amusement park, and we did a Myers-Briggs MBTI. And I took that, and when I walked into this, about 40 people in the class, she would shake everyone's hand. She had all of our results. And I said, "Hi, I'm Jeremy." She said, "Oh, good, you're here." Ooh. I'm like, what does that mean? She said, "Your results are so interesting. I'm going to use you as an example a lot." And she did. So I went to college for mechanical engineering, but I loved it so much that I minored in psychology. And what I mostly do now, for about 18 years, I've been coaching people as they transition from individual contributor to manager. It's a very difficult transition, but a lot of the people have been engineers, and the transition is just a little more difficult, and so much of it has to do with communication. So I started a podcast about 2.5 years ago about communication in the STEM workplace. The STEM workplace happens to have a lot of people who are neurodivergent in some way.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, go ahead.
No.
We were talking a little bit earlier about your experience with STEM and my experience, again, in the role that I have. Having been connected with a lot of STEM organizations, again, to your point, exactly the same reason. We have a really diverse, neurodiverse population. But what I had mentioned to you earlier was oftentimes I find it's reactive. It's somebody hasn't been supported, somebody's struggling in the workplace, and suddenly we need to get a training in here so that we can repair. Do you find that a lot in your work, or are you getting more proactive approaches and people reaching out?
It's starting to get more proactive.
Yeah.
And a lot of the reason why I think it's getting proactive is because there's so much evidence that having neurodiversity in the workplace is beneficial. So it's not a problem that you need to figure out how to handle. Companies like JP Morgan have an Autism at Work program. They specifically find people with autism. They have a group that they work in, and they found that they are 90 to 140% more productive than other people with fewer mistakes. Ernst & Young has found something similar. So a lot of the big companies have found that not only do we need to find a way for them not to be an issue, we need to embrace them because there's so many great things that they bring to the table.
Well said, well said. What do you think, so if these companies have these amazing programs, why don't we all have them? What is the barriers to this that you find when you walk in to do a training? What are some of the barriers?
To me, I think the barrier is that it takes a little more effort and understanding. If you're doing an interview and someone just resonates with you, you see all of their strengths.
Yeah.
If you're interviewing someone and they just seem difficult to communicate with, you just don't see the strengths. If you then do manage to hire someone, then they're just not included as much. You don't value their opinion as much because they don't resonate with you. So people will always look for who they're comfortable with because it feels like it's going to be a more cohesive team if everyone gets along. But cohesion leads to groupthink, which leads to mistakes and lack of creativity. So a little bit of contention is a great thing.
Ooh, I like how you phrase that. That's definitely true. I find, so again, I don't just work in the neurodiversity in the workplace field. I'm training teachers, doctors, police officers, et cetera, et cetera. When I go into an office environment, it's so clear to me when I walk into a place that hasn't had the culture shift yet. And if the culture shift isn't there, and I start making recommendations about light covers and fidgets and work from home opportunities and different types of schedules, et cetera, et cetera. But if the work culture isn't there, if when people disclose their diagnosis, they're told, are you sure? Which I hear a lot. Someone, you don't really seem autistic. I don't think that's correct. Or maybe get a re-eval. Or the old classic, I wonder if any of you have heard this, everybody's got ADHD nowadays. It happens, this is so popular. It's trendy. It's trendy to have an ADHD diet. What a ridiculous thing to say. So if I walk in and I hear this, I think, well, should I throw my PowerPoint out? We got to sit down and really just talk about our biases. I think biases about, and we talked about this earlier too, about when you think of autism, what do you think of? And I ask people all over the world this question, and the number one answer is Sheldon Cooper. So if that is our idea of what autism is, and someone who's high masking, someone who doesn't fit that profile, discloses a diagnosis, they're told things like, you're really good at masking, I never would have guessed. And their needs are not met. And when they do ask for something in the workplace, they're told they're being difficult or unreasonable, or what I just heard yesterday, I wonder if you hear this too, oh, you're using your neurodivergence as an excuse. I hear that constantly. And I will, and then I'm going to pass it back to you, Jeremy. I'm so sorry.
Keep going.
We were talking earlier, one of the most detrimental phrases for me is the term high functioning. Because as soon as somebody is labeled as high functioning, as soon as somebody might self-label as high functioning, suddenly everybody thinks, okay, you don't need any sort of universal design doesn't apply to you. If you ask for something, you're just being unreasonable, rather than, again, having this authentic understanding of neurodivergence, which it's not a medical term. So you can't just Google neurodivergence and you have this exact idea. The way that we use it in our trainings, and I wonder if this is the same for you, Jeremy, is essentially a neurodevelopmental profile or a neurodevelopmental diagnosis. So autism, ADHD, Tourette's, dyslexia, dyscalculia, etc. That's how we use it. And to your point, it's better business. Yes, it's essential that all of us feel fulfilled in our work as a sense of belonging, that we don't have to use all our bandwidth to mask and regulate, of course. but also you're supporting all different kinds of minds with all different problem-solving perspectives and creativity and so many things that are valuable to that bottom line as well.
There are so many things I want to address in what
Sorry,
you said.
I will be quiet.
So I'm going to forget half of them, but that's all right. You know, a lot of the issue around DEI is the E. It's the equity. And it's what makes people rail against it. And I try to ignore the equity because you can define that however you want. Like someone who's got ADHD or whatever, it's fair to give them what they need so they can be productive. If you are a person who looks just like me, worked really, really hard and doesn't get a job because someone wants to check a box, that's not fair to me. If you're an employer who is saying, I have to hire someone that I don't necessarily want to hire, so whichever viewpoint you agree with is great, but accept that there are all those viewpoints and people hold them. So when I think of the equity in DEI, I change the E to a $sign because your employees are your greatest asset when they're engaged and they're your greatest liability when they're not. And equity in the business world is assets minus liabilities. So if you are talking to someone who's pushing back against DEI, change that E to a $sign and just focus on the benefits to them and the company rather than needing to be fair, because that's where most of the pushback comes from, in my opinion.
I like that. I like that. And how do you think, so if someone in HR is looking to hire and recruit neurodivergent talent, is there anything that they might have to do differently in the recruiting process, in the interview process, to bring in that diversity to then use some financial technical terms you just used that I have now forgotten?
You know, I think so much of it is having very specific things that you look for. If you go into an interview and you have very specific skill sets and abilities, and when you go through, you have multiple people in there, so everyone sees from a different angle, and you can then measure after it's over how many check boxes that person got for things that they met. If you don't have very, very specific things that you're looking for, then what you end up with is a feeling. And you have a feeling that's very good about people who think the way you do, and you don't have as good a feeling about people who don't.
Definitely. Very well said. And I'll add to that, when you're interviewing someone, considering the value of the questions that you're asking them. A lot of times we have these questions that are meant to catch somebody or to, you know, what is your greatest weakness? Everybody always says, I care too much, I spend too much time, I don't delegate, I work so hard that I burn myself out. Or they ask questions. This is a real question that I got in a job interview once. What Disney character do you most align with? Now, I said Mulan. Was that the truth? No. Why I said it? She's tough, she's determined, she doesn't take any you-know-what, et cetera, et cetera. The real answer was probably Winnie the Pooh or something like that. But it's truly, what was the intent of that question? The intent of that question was to trip me up or to see if I could figure out what they wanted to hear. It had absolutely nothing to do with the role that I was being interviewed for, and it happens so often for neurodivergent people. So if possible, send the questions in advance. I need interview skills in my job. We're interviewing each other right now. So if I couldn't do this, that would be a problem. But not everybody, a software engineer probably doesn't need, I don't know, but I'm guessing, that back and forth. So how can we test their skills in an authentic way? Really consider what we need from the person. Again, to your point, if it's just, are we having a feel-good conversation, that's going to set a lot of neurodivergent people up for failure because we haven't thought about what works best for that person. Can they demonstrate their skills without having that sort of back and forth conversation?
And it's kind of the same thing in the workplace. When someone does have a job, people tend to look for themselves in the behavior of others. So this guy's not a team player. Well, he happens to be the most introverted person you've ever met. So it's a lot more work for him, talking about myself, to go and interact at those things. It's just awkward. And one thing that I like to talk about is it's not just neurodivergence that is an issue. I say neurodifferent. Because, like I said, I haven't been diagnosed with anything, but when I walked into that room, she said, "Oh, good, you're here." Because for many, many people, I'm just so different than them that it makes communication really, really hard. I'll give you a great example is introverts and extroverts in meetings. How many meetings do we all go to?
4,000.
And how often do they get hijacked by one or two people? So what's happening is that extroverts like to interact while they think. They think out loud and they want the feedback. Introverts think in here and they want to make sure they have a fully formed answer before they're comfortable saying anything. So you go to a meeting and they'll say, "Everybody give me your thoughts on this." And the introverts are all thinking about it, and by the time they have an answer they're happy with, the conversation's moved on and they don't get to say anything. The extroverts jumped in and they're talking to each other and making the meeting go longer, but you're never hearing from the other people. So just one structural thing, not an accommodation, structural thing. When you're having a meeting, if you're going to ask for feedback on a topic, let them know ahead of time. Because the introverts have time to process and they'll be happy to jump in with an answer right away in the meeting. The extroverts went and found someone else to talk to. They did all their thinking with someone else and they have an answer, so their answer doesn't take so long in the meeting. The meetings get shorter and more productive with input from everyone. And it's just a simple thing that makes the world better, the workplace better for everyone, and yes, for people, with certain diagnoses. That's a big deal, but it's not just a big deal for them, it's a big deal for all of us.
First of all, I feel seen that you're describing our staff meetings, and I'm taking so long to kind of process, and everybody's talking, and I have so much to think about now after what you had just said. And I think the point that you raise is so important, because a lot of times when we have these initiatives, these neuro-inclusive initiatives, et cetera, a lot of this sort of top people start to panic and think, oh, now we have to look at each individual employee we have and build a whole system around each one. But that idea of universal design is so valuable. It honors all the different neurotypes based on what neurotypes need, and it's part of the structure. It's part of the scaffolding of the office, so that individuals don't have to constantly advocate for themselves all the time, which is then exhausting. And I think that that's a really important point. Another thing that comes, and again, forgive me for mentioning things we talked about, but I do training all over the world, and I meet with so many different types of professionals and individuals that are receiving services. And I've trained ER doctors, sexual assault forensic examiner nurses, like people in these really difficult professions. And what I was mentioning to Jeremy earlier is the place where I see the most tears is in the neuro-inclusion in the workplace trainings, is in the corporate trainings. And most of the time it's people in the audience saying, "You're describing my experience. I finally feel seen." A lot of times I think I'm hurting people's feelings, and I'll kind of approach them later. Because again, this is the place, as a teacher of young adults, my job, my expectation was, you're going to give your students everything they need and then launch them into the real world without needing any accommodation. The real world doesn't provide. So get them every skill, every support that they need, and then send them out. And when they hit the real world, then they have to sink or swim. And we're realizing how deeply detrimental that is to so many people, to just say, suck it up, get through it, you're high functioning, you don't need this help, this is the real, welcome to the real world. I see that a lot. And then you see the numbers vary, the statistics vary, but MarketWatch in 2019 was talking about a research study that said over 80% of autistic adults who had college educations were unemployed. Now, as I said, that number jumps all over depending on who's doing the research, but the numbers are extraordinarily high compared to just the typical population. So it's not autistic people doing something wrong or people with ADHD or neurodivergent people. It's that we haven't built a culture and a structure, to your point, that universal design, that allows everybody to thrive. And I think that that's that's important. Are you seeing similar things in your work?
Yeah, so I love the 80%, because that's the number that I see as well.
Yeah.
And people who are neurodivergent are 8 times as likely to be unemployed.
Yeah.
So there's this massive, massive employee pool of incredibly qualified people that if you are able to focus on them, all of a sudden you have a huge competitive advantage. Going back to something you said about masking, is people will often say things like, well, there wasn't so much of it when I was a kid.
Yes.
ADHD or whatever it is. And that's because everyone kind of had to mask. And there are any number of people I know who in their 40s and 50s suddenly get diagnosed with ADHD. And what they've been doing all their lives was just coming up with coping mechanisms so that they can get through, but holy cow, is that tiring.
Yes.
And they never knew why some things were so much harder for themselves than they might be for other people.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wonder if you hear this a lot, because I do. When I talk about masking, a lot of people will say, yeah, but everybody masks. We all mask. Everybody, I'm slightly different here talking to you in front of a group than I would be just one-on-one with you, which is different than I would be at Sunday dinner. But that's not masking. That's kind of code switching. That's adjusting my interactions based on the context that I'm in. Whereas masking in neurodivergence is a safety-based response. It is, I cannot show my authentic self. I have to mask my sensory needs. If the HVAC system, which I'm not noticing this one, but if the HVAC system's making a ton of noise, I can't put my hands over my ears because then people will know. So it's just going to be grating for the entire day. My nervous system is going to be worn down. I have to act as if I'm neurotypical. I have to study the neurotypical people around me. People can't know, because if they know, I'll be, usually in the business context, socially unsafe, or my job will be unsafe if people know this about me. And I ask groups, what impact does this have on people to mask? And usually the number one answer, I think you mentioned it, Jeremy, is exhaustion. To use your entire bandwidth throughout the day to mask who you authentically are. And then the mental health components. Like, imagine what that does to your self-esteem, to your mental health, to constantly be acting as somebody other than who you are. And so to be validated in a workplace where you do a great job masking, again, imagine how horrible that must feel. A colleague of mine, who I have permission to share this, she's given me full permission. She actually said, my story is your story. And I was like, don't give me that much permission. But she was on a panel, high masking autistic woman, talking about her autism at a hospital. And someone in the audience raised their hand and said, you don't seem autistic, and I mean that as a compliment. And the person who said that was autistic himself. So the internalized ableism, the externalized, all of that, she called me from the car and she was crying and she said, what do I do with that? And I said, you got to give me a couple of minutes. I got to think about this one. I don't know. It was just this constant barrage of invalidation. So I think to just say, everybody masks, we're all putting on a certain persona, is different than feeling like if your true self was revealed, there would be challenging consequences around that. And I think you touched on that actually with the exhaustion piece.
And so now I can only hear the fan.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I trigger everyone.
Yep, thanks for that.
I'm sorry.
And there are studies about when you look at people who have burnout, the number of people who are neurodivergent far outpace the people who are not because of that extra burden of masking. And girls are better at masking than boys are. And the diagnosis of ADHD is something like 8% of school-age girls and 15% of school-age boys. Because the boys' symptoms are annoying to the teacher. They're loud and they move around and the teacher gets frustrated, so they send the kid to someone. The girls' behavior tends to be withdrawal and being quiet and not causing any problems. So they're just not going to get diagnosed. So females have been historically better at masking, and that continues. So, but the high masking is just a lot of work, and this is just a silly example. Imagine you're 7 feet tall. There's nothing inherently good or bad about being 7 feet tall. except that you live in this world. So if you're 7 feet tall and you want to play basketball or volleyball, awesome. If you want to walk through a doorway without having to duck every single time or get on an airplane and go somewhere, it's hard. So going back to universal design, it's not making an accommodation. An accommodation implies there's something wrong with you and I'm going to help you. But if you design the workplace so that it's beneficial to everyone, whether they're just neurodifferent, neurodivergent, or just get really annoyed by people fidgeting or whatever it is.
Yeah.
If you can design it so that it works for everyone, then it's going to be better. Another thing that I'll say, sorry to go on too long.
No, please.
Is people take in information in different ways. If you are a visual person, you're going to tend to give information visually. If you don't have dyslexia, you're very likely to give written information to people. So one thing that I recommend, and you can talk about some of the tools, is as much as you can give information in multiple ways, both giving the information and allowing them to provide you information. If you can allow that to be done, written, visually, recorded, whatever it is, that makes the world better for everyone, because it does not take a neurodivergent diagnosis to prefer one thing over the other.
Perfectly put. And I really resonate with what you just said, and I think I told you when I was a teacher and suddenly realized I wasn't doing right by my students and shifted. And then the same thing happened as a manager. And before I started managing autistic people, an email from me would start with, 7 years ago, and then I'd write 10 paragraphs just to tell you the sky was blue and what is she talking about here. And I realized that didn't work for a lot of the people that I was managing. And so I just dove into the research and started taking classes, and I really reformulated not who I was as a manager. And I think that's important because so many managers have a sense of identity, at least professional identity, from the way that we engage with and interact with the people that work for us or with us, but in how I deliver the information. And so now everything is very clear. It's the important stuff is highlighted. There are bullet points. I've shown all of my team where to go on the screen to have it read to them rather than reading it. We use visuals, pictures. When I go to a training, typically if one of my neurodivergent colleagues is coming with me, I'll film the drive-in. This is what the door looks like. This is where you walk in, so to give lots of extra context. And it's become just second nature to me. So once, when I was teaching, I started as a general education teacher, then I learned to teach different types of neurologies, and I did the same thing as a manager. And I think if we start, to your point from earlier, we keep looking over our shoulder and saying, well, when I started out, it wasn't like this. That's one of the worst things we can do, because then we're saying we're not going to evolve. We're going to stay stuck. We're going to do things the way that we did them 3-4 decades ago. And the people that didn't benefit from that system will continue to be excluded. Rather than, we're evolving human beings. Let's evolve in the workplace just as we have. And I'll add this last thing, I promise I'll pass it back over to you, is the workplace itself has changed over the last couple of decades. Even to your point of, and sorry I keep bringing it up, the HVAC system. We're bombarded by technology now, and people can reach us 24 hours a day. And the boundaries between work and home are blurred. And the sensory environment, we have LED lights now that are extremely bright. We have so many different things that weren't present in the 80s and 90s when a lot of the people are referencing. So we're evolving, and so too should the workplaces. Back over to you, Jeremy.
I'm going to go back to something you said earlier, and this is good advice for everyone. If you go and ask someone for help, ask them for the most specific thing that you need. If you go to your manager and you say, it's too loud in here, you are a problem, and they're trying to do something to help you. If you say, if I can get some noise-canceling headphones, I will be 20% more productive, they're going to love that answer. Every manager will love it if you go to them with a solution like, here's what I propose. Just make it easy on them. Make it easy on them to give you what it is that you need, rather than making them have to work for it. And you're empowering yourself when you do it. But so often people will go in and they'll just state their problem. They might not even ask for help. they assume that when they state a problem, someone's going to want to help. So when I'm a manager, if someone comes to me with a problem, my answer is, what would you do if I wasn't here? And they do not like that question. But I will make them answer it. They will then come up with an answer, and you can train people to get in the habit of coming up with solutions for themselves. And then when they come to you, all they're asking for is permission to do a thing or a tool that you can give them.
Well said. Yes.
And I'm going to maybe be controversial and or contradict you.
No.
But one thing that I don't care for is someone needs to accomplish a task and they just throw up their hands and say, well, I'm neurodivergent, so like, that's not an answer. So it's the responsibility of everyone. We just got the thumbs up to start it.
Wrap it up.
Allowing questions.
May I quickly respond and then so agreed. I think one of the things that's, and I'm going to speak just about autism for a moment because that's my area, is some autistic people don't know what they need. I hear this a lot, and I'm not saying that because they're not brilliant people, but just difficulty knowing what to ask for, what the struggle is. And if anybody is in a situation like that, come find me after, because I can send you some resources, some self-evaluation tools. I've used them myself, and I'm not autistic, and they've been very, very helpful for me. And it gives you a framework. This is what I should ask for. This is how I work. Done. Thank you.
Are there questions?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, because you left us hanging with the, oh, good, you're here.
Oh.
So I'm curious to know, what was it about the, oh, good, you're here, that you left with from that day that was positive in nature, whether it be validation or affirmation, or what was your takeaway from that?
So if for anyone who's familiar with the MBTI, I am an INTP, and it's like negative to positive 100. I am like negative 99, negative 99, positive 98, and then smack dab in the middle. And what I came away with is that people aren't just being difficult. They actually see the world that differently than I do. And it's astounding. Like, you can logically know it, but then when you would do these, she would have us do experiments, and then you see what the other side does. Can I tell a quick story?
Please.
So on the introversion side, she took the 5 most introverted, we left out that door. The 5 most extroverted went out that door. She explained to the room what was going to happen. She opened our door, we're standing there. She said, why don't you come in? We came in, there were 5 chairs. There were 5 of us. We still stood there and looked at her. She said, why don't you sit down? People are laughing out loud. We're like, I don't know why this is funny. I sat down on the end because I didn't want to have both sides taken, and I shifted my chair out a little bit. People are like rolling laughing right now. She looked kind of over her head and said, explain your ideal vacation and who would be there. And we looked at each other, and I was on the far left, so obviously I went first. And I said, and then there was going to be one other person there. And people are laughing, and they can't, we're like, what is so funny? She said, I told them exactly what you would do. I'm like, that's what everyone would do. She said, watch this. She's like, I'm going to open that door. I'll have to ask them to come in twice because they're talking so much. When they come in, they're going to sit in those chairs without me telling them to. All of them will be touching each other, and when I ask the same question in the same way, they're going to huddle up, figure out where they want to go on vacation together, and then they're going to invite all of you. I'm like, that is the dumbest thing I have ever heard. And it is spot on what happened.
Wow.
So when you go through that and you see just like they are that different, it really helps you to step back when someone's being difficult, to say they're not trying to be difficult. They're doing their best in their own way, and it's up to me to try and bridge that gap.
Well said. Well said.
So I want to say how much I appreciate this. Personally and professionally, this is super helpful, right? So I have a son with autism, and I'm getting ready to do a big search committee for a position at ARI, right? So you have opened my eyes to both sides of that coin, so I'm going to come find you for a reason.
Please do.
But one of the things that I think about is when you talk about that process of finding folks, right? And that are going to be part of interviews. One of the things I'd like to ask you, are there things that you've done specifically because you have me thinking about the rubric that we're going to use and how I can change those questions? Because the one thing that I want to be conscious of, so I didn't say who I am, Michelle Font from the University of Rhode Island, and I am in diversity, equity, and inclusion all the time in my work. I want to be better at it from this point of view. So do you have any, thoughts about what are the kinds of things that we should be doing differently when we're in a search process? Because the common way to do it is not the way that we should. That's what I do know.
Go ahead.
Okay. So one of the things that I recommend is being very concrete with the expectations for the role. So a lot of times we have this tendency to use very flowery language and talk a lot about office culture and all of these sorts of things. So really the exact specifications, essential duties, essential roles, and oftentimes I have worked with autistic people and non-autistic people actually, who are constantly going back to that job description. Well, you asked me to do that, but that's not what I signed up for here. So really internally, before you post, if you haven't done this already, which you probably have, making that description watertight, making that role watertight. This is what we're looking for, and then describing it exactly in very direct language, avoiding any sort of any terminology that requires context to interpret it, I would say. I can also recommend a couple of books if that's helpful. One of which I reference a lot is called The Canary Code. It's written by an autistic woman, and she has tons and tons and tons of information on different types of supports that you can put in place for different spots. So the hiring process, the onboarding process, et cetera, et cetera.
And just to piggyback on that, when I'm talking to managers, I will have them, or working with anyone, I will say, write out your list of top 5 most important things that you can get done in a week on a consistent basis. Now go to your manager and ask them to write their top 5 most important things. I've never once seen them match. So if you kind of look at it from that angle, most people don't really define what they want in a role. So, to your point, doing that.
Thank you. That's excellent. And one thing I'll add, as part of the interview process, I would just send this to everybody, not a person who's disclosed a diagnosis, just for everybody. Here are some options for the interview, if applicable. You can do a face-to-face interview. You can receive the questions in advance. Again, if you don't need to see how someone thinks on their feet. Or you can receive our top 10 questions in advance. We may ask you some additional follow-up questions in the moment, which I do oftentimes. Would you like to do this? Because I've done interviews before where we're walking rather than sitting face-to-face, because that can be intimidating for some people. So again, it's not, and are there any sensory needs that you'd like us to be mindful of? Turning off overhead lighting, things like that in that space. I was interviewing an autistic woman once and the fire alarm went off in the middle. That was probably the worst thing that could have happened. But yeah, those type of structures.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Yeah.
When you're part of your response?
Yes.
So, and again, this could be preconceived notions about what I was given when I stepped into my role as HR manager. That if we meet in person, we got to meet everybody in person. If we meet virtually, we got to meet everyone virtually. So that way, you talk about fairness, right? You're talking about unfair advantages in the hiring practice. So if you met with that person and you were walking, does that mean that you have to, should, or where does that fall with compliance? And, walking with everybody when you're interviewing. How do you manage that? Does it matter?
What I do, and then I'll hop right over to you, what I do, and I don't know whether or not we're the Autism Project, we're a little organization, so whether or not, anyone here from Brown Health? I could ask them, but so I offer it to everybody. Here are your options for the interview process. You can do. Now, that being said, if it's an in-person job where the person, it has to be able to do something like we're doing here, you might want to see the person in that context. But if it's available, I just will, again, offer it to whomever. Not everybody's going to choose that.
Right.
I would want to just sit down and get through the interview. I wouldn't want to go for the walk. I'd want to be in person and all those sorts of things. So that's just a personal way that I typically do it. Were you going to add to that?
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Got it,
Offer
okay.
options to everyone, because that, by definition, is the definition of universal design, right?
Right.
So when I taught a graduate class when I was professor, and the class was the one class that you took if you were getting a master's degree in any education field that was about special populations, that they used to call it special populations. And so I was trying to demonstrate the concept of universal design to my students. So I said, there's going to be a midterm for this class. It is going to be either an oral presentation that you will give to the class, a research paper which you will write, or a objective 40-question multiple choice exam. Each one of you gets to tell me which one of those options you wish to use to show me what you have learned.
Perfect. Thank
I
you.
would actually also add that it's actually equitable if you're giving the option, because you said, if everyone has to do the in-person, but is it really, because you're baselining someone's different ability to think. So they're a neurodivergent person that might be seeking an accommodation to interview. So if you get pushback from a compliance perspective, you're really just accommodating someone that thinks differently or has different mobility or whatever that looks like. So I think you're totally safe from a compliance perspective. I would also add for my HR professionals in the room, lean on some of the resources that you might have that do assessments with once they become employees, right? So past the interview phase, once they're employees, as you're seeking accommodations, sometimes we're not all knowledgeable. We're not, I don't know an HR professional that's also a clinician, but I love that if you are. So we cannot determine some of the things they need.
Yes.
So we really kind of, I'm not going to say outsource, our current leave administrator does this for us, inclusive as part of the services they offer us, but for an employee that has any type of different ability, whether it's neurodivergency or not, they do an assessment and they provide the recommendation from a clinical perspective, and they're mindful of what our workplace looks like. You mentioned the headphones, so that's something we've really kind of been leveraging as people have been needing them for a variety of reasons. Maybe you need to be seated near less lighting or more lighting.
Yeah.
So some of those things, as once they're an employee, so that you don't feel like you have to own some of these decisions, because I do think the neurodivergent spectrum is so wide that no matter how much we dive into it, we're not going to know it all. So
Absolutely.
I would recommend looking at those resources that you might already pay for this and not even know it. Where do you work?
Nice.
Oh, neighborhood. Okay.
So I think we need to start wrapping up. We're going to be here. If there are any questions, you want our cards, anything like that, just come up and talk to us afterwards. But thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If today's conversation resonated with you, share this episode with one person on your team who might benefit from it. And if you're leading a technical team and want to explore how these communication principles could work in your organization, visit www.neuroconvergentleadership.com to learn more, and there you can reach out to schedule an appointment. I'd be happy to talk through what might be going on in your world. See you next week.